Hi, and welcome to my seminar. I'm obviously a parent of an autistic child who has pathological demand avoidance. So my daughter, Sienna May, is a wonderful, wonderful girl, but she has the challenges and the issues that come along with having pathological demand avoidance. And it can be very frustrating at times, very difficult, but that's part of, what I'm here to talk about is how we work through that. So as I say, my daughter has pathological demand avoidance. And it's something that we stumbled across, and I found this to be quite a common story, is that you probably aren't aware of pathological demand avoidance until someone suggests it. And then you stumble across the criteria and the list of traits, and it's almost like reading a blueprint for your child. And that's definitely what happened to us. We've been in the process of diagnosis for autism in the area I live in the UK. They don't diagnose pathological demand avoidance, but you get autism and usually an ADHD diagnosis that accompany it. I had that eureka moment, if you like, that epiphany when I read the traits, and it was literally every single one I was able to tick off for my daughter, and it was very confronting at the time. It really hit me. It hit me as a bloke, and part of what I'm sort of speaking about here is fathering autism and what it's like being a dad in this situation, and how I dealt with it and how I came to terms with it. And I think this is probably a big issue that comes up. We get a lot of, on my group on Facebook, there's a lot of mothers will come on and say, my husband, my partner, the child's father just doesn't understand, doesn't get it. And as a result, I'm going to speak in some generalizations here, and I'm aware they're generalizations, but they're generalizations that are a necessity in discussing this. The problem that us blokes have is that I think it's an innate part of us that we want to fix things and we want to find solutions. And with autism and with pathological demand, there isn't a fix, there isn't a cure. It doesn't need a cure. I firmly believe that autism is just another way of being in whatever way it is. It doesn't need to be cured, but it is presented usually as something that's wrong, rightly or wrongly in that. I don't believe it's something that's wrong. Like I say, it's a difference. However, when we're presented with it, it's like there's a fault, there's something wrong. The first thing they try and address is your parenting style. Is it your fault? All the kind of blame issues that go along with it. But they'll also look at things like hearing. Is it just that she's not hearing things? And my daughter had to go in for hearing tests and was failing them. Now, it turned out that was to do with the ADHD and not being able to focus on anything for too long. But it really hit me at the time that there was talk of maybe getting a hearing aid, one of those sort of straps with the hearing aid thing put in. And I was suddenly confronted with there's something not right here. There's something that's going to be different. And for me, I was bullied a lot as a child, and I carry that with me in a way. And the thought that my child might be bullied for something that was different about her really hit home. And so I immediately went into this thing of needing to fix, needing to address and somehow solve the problem. I think it's a naturally male thing to do, and not necessarily the right thing, but it's something, and again, it's a generalization, but it's something that men tend to do, is they want to fix things, and this isn't something that has an immediate fix. What I was eventually able to do is start researching and understanding. And once I knew what we were dealing with, and once I knew about pathological demand avoidance, once I'd seen this trait list and realized this is my daughter on paper, I was able to start researching and reading. I got books on pathological demand avoidance, and I started to speak to, I'm lucky enough to have friends who are autistic as adults. And that's been an absolute godsend for me, because it's people I'm able to approach who understand this from the inside. And I found that to be a huge, huge benefit. So first and biggest piece of advice is get books written by autistic people, books by pathological demand avoidant people, books by people who understand this from the inside, as well as the ones who've done the research and have looked at this stuff. So when I first learned of my daughter's condition, when I learned that she had PDA, and I actually went through a grieving process for it. And I think this is really common and something a lot of people face. So the first stage was denial, and this came on strongly. It's like, and I think this is what a lot of parents go through regardless. I think it's certainly something a lot of men go through, is there's actually, this isn't what they're talking about. It's something that's solvable. I want to be able to fix this. And it's like, no, it's not autism. It's not this issue. You know, these things aren't right. It's just a case of needing to address these things. And a great example of how this really came out strongly was understanding masking. Because my first go-to was, well, look, she can function quite well in these different situations. When she's not at home, she behaves. When she's not at home, she listens to other people and she will do the right thing. You know, this is obviously something to do with, you know, how we're doing stuff at home, or, you know, maybe everyone's right when they're telling us we're bad parents and all this kind of stuff. And you go through all this stuff, and because I didn't understand masking. Understanding masking was a huge development for me. And what masking is, it's a figurative way of saying it. They're putting a mask on. So what they're actually doing is playing a role. So when a lot of people experience this with schools, and it's really hard to get schools to understand what's going on, because at home, you're facing all of these meltdowns, you're facing all of this anxiety and stress and anger and frustration. At school, they're little angels. They're doing everything they're told. And what this is masking. And it's likened to a Coke bottle effect, they call it. And that's the idea that basically all day this Coke bottle's being shaken. They're at school and they're repressing the anxiety. And autism and anxiety are so intrinsically linked. And so that really comes out. But with the school and stuff like that, it's like this Coke bottle. They're repressing it. They're going to stay as calm as they can, and they're going to get through the day. And the second they walk through that door at home, bam, that's when you suddenly get this outpouring of behaviours, and what it's like, it's lifting the lid off the Coke bottle and out it all comes. And you know, we're the ones who get covered with the with the resulting explosion, and it's so hard. And you start to blame yourself, and you start to blame situations, and you wonder what everyone else is doing right. And finally, you come to an understanding that it's absolutely nothing to do with that. It's this masking process that's taking place. And so this denial thing really hit me hard. I didn't want to accept that this could be autism. I wanted to find a different solution, because it was something that was solvable in my mind, rightly or wrongly, and I believe wrongly now. The next stage is probably the worst one in a lot of ways, and that's the anger. And it's when I was so frustrated with the situation, and I went through the whole sort of why us phase. Why do we get lumped with this, and why do we have to deal with this? And it's a very destructive place to be, because it focuses on all the wrong things, and it sort of naturally flows from the denial aspect. I went from, this can't be the case, to, well, why is this the case? This is, so unfair. And you look at other people taking their kids through the supermarket, buying the week's groceries without any issues. The kids asking for sweets, and they'd say no, and that would be that. For us, it'd be no, and suddenly we're dealing with a meltdown in public, and there was just so many things, and you just get angry. And I still go through it every now and again. You go back to that sense of, why us? It's not a healthy thing, but it is a natural part of the progression that you go through with the sort of grieving process, because you are in a sense grieving. You're grieving what was the perception of what your life would be like as a family, and suddenly that's had to be put to rest, and you're having to accept that something else is going to be your reality. It's different to what we planned, and it's so frustrating, and it creates so much tension inside. But it's something we have to be able to work past to make the future happen, and for it to be a good place to be. Following on, you go through the bargaining, and I probably didn't face this one as much. Bargaining's a part of the grieving process, and you sort of go through that in a sense of, it's almost finding a balance. And I think that's where the bargaining came in for me, is where do you find the balance between accepting that this is going to be part of our lives, and this is part of who my daughter is, and making life work around it. And for me, that was the bargaining part. It was starting to adjust and to, as I say, find that balance in things, and work a way to make life work for all of us as a family. Next is this depression. And I do believe this hit in its way. I went through a period where I was really struggling to deal with it all, and that it sort of flows from the anger. Once you sort of got through the anger of why me, is the sort of sad why me, why us, why is my daughter. And in fact, that's probably it. The anger was focused inwards. When the depression side of it comes, it's focused outwards. Why is my daughter going to have to suffer with this all her life? Now, that's not an accurate thing. Suffering was this was the early stages, but it's how it felt to me. Why is my daughter going to have to cope with this all her life? It just melts your heart, because we love our kids. I love my daughter with all my heart. I love my son with all my heart. I love my wife with all my heart. And when you compile these things together and you realise it's all been so dramatically affected, it really hits home. And you go through that depression part. But it's an important part to go through, because once you face that, you come into that acceptance. And acceptance is the key. Once I'd accepted in myself that my daughter is autistic, then I could start putting things in place to make tomorrow better than today. How do I build our lives so that we're able to make tomorrow, for my family, for my daughter, for my son, for my wife, for myself, better than today? And that's when I really started picking up the books and talking to people and finding out more about what it's like to live with this stuff, and finding ways to manage these conditions. And there are ways, and there are so many things that we can do to make life easier for our families. And that all came from that acceptance. Once I'd accepted my daughter as an autistic person, once I'd accepted my daughter had pathological demand avoidance, I was then able to work with that and progress with it. So that led to embracing pathological demand avoidance. And that's just so key here. Once I'd embraced it, it's not just accepted it, embracing is the next stage. So accepting it is one thing and learning about it. Once I'd embraced it, once I'd actually sat down and thought to myself, how do I help my daughter through this and make her life as good as possible, while also helping the rest of us to be, in this family to be as well and healthy as possible and make life as good as possible. How do we go about that? And it was embracing it. And I started to see things, and I think for blokes in particular, this will be something that really rings true. I started to see things in my daughter that, while they were so frustrating for me, are going to help her in life in a huge way. An example of that is the inability to accept the word no. Now, in business, and before I've become a full-time carer for my daughter, and through necessity. But before that, I was running a business, and you can't run a business without the ability to ignore the naysayers and the people who are saying no to you. You work a way to turn that to a yes. And I worked in sales before that. And the whole concept of sales is basically turning a no into a yes. If someone comes in and they don't want it, you've got to find the way to make them think, I do need this. You need to, turn that no into a yes. For my daughter, she won't hear the word no. She will just power on regardless, under her own strength, and she'll make it happen. Very frustrating as a parent. It's led to some very, very challenging moments and some hilarious ones as well. And it's just such a good thing for the future that when she's out there doing things for herself, she will be able to ignore the word no, because it's just an inherent part of her. Once I started embracing the pathological demand avoidance and the autism, what I was then able to do is look for ways to work with it. When you embrace it, you've accepted it, but now you're working with it. And how do I make my life work with my daughter? So that led to the research, and that in itself led to finding techniques of working around pathological demand avoidance and making it something that didn't have to have such a dramatic impact. Making a game of tidying up the room rather than it just being tidy up your room. Suddenly reframing it into something that's just that slight bit different. Let's make a game of it. How quickly can we get as many toys into this box as possible? How quickly can we get the bed sorted? How quickly can we do this? Or just simply reframing things in a different way of phrasing it, rather than giving the demand, making it something that she feels in control of, and learning how to give that illusion of control, if you like, was something that was a big breakthrough for me personally, and I think for us as a family, once we'd realised that we could give a sense of control back to her and also help her to achieve the things she needs to achieve. And it's made a huge difference. And it came from embracing the pathological demand avoidance and then working with it. As I said previously, asking other autistic people made a huge difference for me. I'm very fortunate. I've had a few friends who are autistic themselves, and being able to approach them. So we had a situation a little while back where we discovered my daughter was hearing voices. This is actually a common part of autism, but I didn't know this. And we've got some mental health issues in my family, and there is bipolar affective disorder and there is schizophrenia in the bloodlines. And so I was thinking, this is really bad. The best thing I was able to do is talk to other autistic people. My autistic friends were able to say, oh, we get that all the time. It's just one of those things, and it's part of life, and it's part of life with autism, and you can work around it. Just hearing that from somebody was such a relief. Finding autistic people who can help you to understand autism can help you so much in understanding from the inside what's going on. Finding out about the links between autism and anxiety, and that my daughter lives with this constant high anxiety that isn't obvious until the meltdown comes. And that's why it appears that she's going from 0 to 100 in 0.2 seconds. It's actually that this anxiety has been there all along and she just can't cope with it. And so you get these meltdowns and you get these behaviors, and you get the demand avoidance because it's a way of controlling that anxiety. Finding this stuff out made such a huge difference. It helped me to understand her and therefore accept her and embrace her differences and work with them and be able to use those things to help make her life better. I had the great privilege of talking to a lady by the name of Laura McConnell, who is a teacher in Scotland, and she is pathologically demand avoidant. And it's been so interesting hearing what it's like as an adult and knowing what I can prepare my daughter for just simply by talking to her. If there's one thing that I can get out of this to get the message across, is talk to autistic people, talk to people who have these issues in their lives, because it's the best source of information, better than any book, better than any seminar that anyone can do, is that information coming straight from the horse's mouth, and it makes such a difference. So after getting this information, after doing this research, talking to autistic people, it was about putting strategies in place that were going to work for us. And this is something that I think you have to do on a level that is purely on your family's terms. It's going to be different for every family, because like every person is different, like every autistic person is different, like every, living creature is different in one way or another. Every family is different. We all have different family dynamics. We all have different things that we cope with, different weaknesses and different strengths. And it's working with those things to make sure that they're going to work with your family and your family unit, however it may be. Whether you're a family like myself, or I've got my wife and we've got our kids. You could be a single parent, you could be a single father, you could be a single mother. There's so many different ways a family can be. And so finding the strategies that work for your child, who is different to every other child who has pathological demand avoidance or autism, everybody's unique. Working those strategies in really, really help. I had to relearn parenting. I think this is key. You kind of have to relearn parenting when you start dealing with things like pathological demand avoidance, with autism in general. The way you're going to parent is going to be completely different. And I had to find this in reverse in a way, because we'd obviously brought my daughter up in a certain way, adapting with her autism, adapting with the pathological demand avoidance, and adapting with her differences. When my son was born, he's a neurotypical. And it was actually a teacher who's a friend of ours who actually said to me, you need to parent him differently. You are approaching him in the same way you're approaching your daughter, and it's a different situation. He's processing things differently, and you're going to have to work with that. So I kind of learned that one in reverse. When we found out about pathological demand avoidance, we had to change our parenting style and adapt to it. And it was things like giving those things of control, learning your battles to pick and things like that. And that was a big thing, because, part of that insistent on wanting to fix things. I was trying to find ways that I could fix the situation. So I wanted to immediately have results. And do you go strict? Do you become, completely obsessed with everything has to be a certain way because routine's an important part of autism? Or is it, and as I say, finding out about PDA and then finding out about the idea of giving control back in a way that's manageable makes such a difference. And it's that stuff that comes from research and talking to other autistic people. And it's putting those strategies in place and adapting them as we go. And this is the thing, we've just had a challenge recently in that my daughter has just hit puberty. Very common with autism is early onset puberty. So my daughter's only 10, but she's hit puberty. And we're getting periods and we're getting the PMT and all the stress that comes leading up to that, the hormones. And, when you combine that with pathological demand avoidance, you can imagine the fun we're having at home right now. It's a joy. I'm being very sarcastic if you hadn't picked that up. It's really hard. But again, it's adapting your strategies. And that's what we've had to learn to do. Is every day is going to be different. And every day is different because we don't know which version of my daughter we're going to wake up to. And some days she can be really challenging. Some days she's goes through, we don't have a problem. And it's like, whoa, where's this come from? Learning that's part of PDA as well was huge. And understanding that, it's good now, enjoy it while it lasts, because it's going to be challenging again tomorrow, most likely. And that's the way it flows. So adapting the strategies as we go and learning new ones. As she learns our strategies, she kind of adapts. So the idea is saying, rather than saying tidy your room, saying, what should we put away first? After 2 or 3 times of doing that, it didn't work anymore because she'd worked out that was exactly what we were trying to get her to do, was just tidy her room, and she didn't want to do it. She converted it into a demand in her mind, and that was, so we had to adapt the strategy, and we continually have to adapt our strategies to make them work for our daughter and to work for our family. And as the kids grow and the family changes in that way, those adaptations will have to be made again. For me as a bloke, one of the hardest parts was learning to compartmentalize incidents. And this is something I still struggle with. I've shared on my channel times that I've failed to do this. My daughter can be very aggressive and very violent with her meltdowns. Not all kids are this way. Many kids with pathological demand avoidance seem to be this way. It seems to be a very aggressive way of dealing with meltdowns and that release of anxiety. Having to put my family's safety first became a real issue, because obviously we have a younger boy and my wife isn't well, and so this picking things up, throwing them, smashing things becomes dangerous, physically threatening to the people in my home. How do I deal with that? I've had to make certain adaptations to that, and it's not something I like. And I occasionally have to restrain my daughter. Now, I don't do this happily. It's not something I'd ever wanted to do. But basically, we discovered we had to do this. And the only way I could keep everybody safe was to learn some safe restraint techniques. They're not what you see as music. It's not pinning her to the floor and lying on top of her or anything like that. They're quite safe, gentle holds that just keep her from being able to lash out and keep everybody safe. And most importantly, keeps her safe, stops her from hurting herself. It was a real challenge to have to come to that. But in the end, I had to prioritize what is best for my family and keeping everybody safe, and knowing that people were in danger when she's in that level of meltdown became the overriding factor. It's not something I take any joy in. And what I really struggle with is the moments afterwards. I feel really low in myself. I hate that I've had to do that. I hate that we've been put in a situation. I know how much she hates being restrained, and it's awful. And it's not something I ever wanted to be a part of. Take to that, you can carry that forward and it can mar an entire day. So we might go out, we might experience a meltdown, we might experience a challenging situation and we have to deal with it. And you can either carry on and take that with you, or you compartmentalize it. And I'm still learning to do this, but it's being able to move on from the moment, and it was just a moment, and carrying on with the rest of the day and not letting the rest of the day be tarred with that brush. It's challenging, it's difficult, and learning to forgive myself in those moments is really challenging as well. Ultimately, safety is what's most important, but not carrying forward that anger or resentment or guilt or upset from that moment and just carrying on with the day is a skill I'm learning, and I'm still learning, and I struggle with greatly, but it's really important. What that led to from all this learning and embracing was becoming an advocate for pathological demand avoidance and being an advocate for autism in general. I've been very privileged to be allowed to be an ambassador for Devon Carers, which is the carers support network that exists in my local area. I started the group on Facebook, I've started my YouTube channel, and it's all about advocating. And I want my daughter to know in 10 years' time when she's moving into adulthood, I want her to know that she's got somebody who's proud of her behind her. And I've honestly found autism and pathological demand avoidance, they're not something that you're going to cure and take away, and they don't need to be. And this is the biggest thing that's hit me, is the sense that these things don't need to be taken away. They're just a difference. And if we can work with that difference and embrace it and work with it, it's so much more positive, and there's so much more that can be carried forward. My daughter is amazing, and I am going to be her strongest advocate, and I'm doing that now. I will do everything I can in my power to make sure that she goes forward into a world that understands and embraces her differences and sees the value and beauty in them, and sees the value and beauty in her, and isn't constantly trying to beat her into a different kind of mindset. And there's this horrible rift that sometimes exists between neurotypical and neurodiverse people, and it doesn't need to be there if we can simply embrace the difference and say, I'm proud of who my daughter is. I love the difference that autistic people bring to the world, and the gifts and the creativity and the joy that they can bring. And that was the biggest thing for me, is finding the joy in all these things. Seeing the funny side of some situations. We were driving to a shop, and my daughter was in the back of the car, and this poor chap was walking along with an eye patch. Obviously he had an injury of some description, and my daughter's just yelled out from the back of the car, "It's a pirate!" And you can tell her all you like not to do these things, but she just yelled it out, and he was like, oh, and I just wanted to shrink behind the steering wheel and try and drive off quietly. You get these moments, and a particularly funny one for us was that probably due to my driving and a weak moment of anger, road rage or whatever, I'd used a bad word. I'd said, for F's sake. And almost immediately you could hear it being parroted in the back of the car. It's like, what do I do about this? F's sake, F's sake. The way she said it, because she was young at the time, she still had that baby sort of tone to her voice. It sounded like she was saying fat snake. So we went out, hopped onto Amazon and found a stuffed large fat snake and bought it. So whenever she said it when we were out, I'd carry it with me. Here it is. Here's fat snake. Here's fat snake. You make it really public. There he is. There's fat snake, because my child wouldn't be saying those kind of things. My daughter has taught me more bad words than I would have ever learned from anywhere else. Part of her school, because she's in a special needs school now, they warned us she's going to learn some very fruity language. By goodness, were they right. The things that she can come out with. And it's that horrible moment where you're trying really hard not to laugh and not to accept it, but at the same time, it's just really funny. There are moments of joy. And when I see the progression that she's made, finding the right school for her and seeing her blossom into, the smart, intelligent, wonderful girl that she is. When I've seen how adapting my strategies and my parenting style has brought us closer together. Sometimes it drives a wedge when it's really difficult, but there are times where we go out for a coffee together. She has one of the mini hot chocolatey things, has the marshmallows on it, and it's a treat for her. But it's those moments where it's just her and I sometimes, and she just comes to me for a cuddle. She comes to me for that reassurance, because she knows, I honestly believe she knows that I'm her biggest advocate and I'm her biggest support. There is so much joy to be found in it. And if you're a dad who's struggling with this, start looking for those moments of joy and realizing that this isn't the end of the world. It's the start of a different one. And for me, that knowledge really, really, really broke through.